Greetings, everyone. Welcome. As you enter the room, please introduce yourself. You can put your name and your pronouns, your organization and location, and what is your superpower? Thank you, God love, I do too. It is Enough by Appleby. Yeah. Welcome, welcome. Huge thank you to Catalyst and to my co-hosts, Alison and Mary Ellen, and to all of you for showing up here today and bringing your whole selves to the space. For those of you who are able, we'd love to see your faces. And we don't mind the cameos. So like last week, for all the furry friends, the children, humans, any other living being in the community in which you preside, this is real life and we're here for it. So yeah, for anyone who is visually impaired or can only access audio for any reason, we will provide physical descriptions. My name is Lorrie Fair Allen. I use pronouns she, her. I'm an olive-skinned, half Chinese, half European mix. I'm a woman in my mid-40s with long brown hair. I'm wearing a kind of a spa green shirt, and behind me is a wood-paneled wall with a window and a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm the Chief Program Director at the Charlize Theron Africa Outreach Project and a Trust-Based Philanthropy Ambassador. The Trust-Based Philanthropy Project was started when a group of peers from grant-making foundations had been inviting funders to interrogate power imbalances in philanthropy, and they decided to form a community of practice to help support the broader adoption of equitable practices. I'm calling for my home here in, sorry, I'm just gonna putting a little link here in the chat. I'm calling for my home here on the unceded ancestral territory of the Tongva and Ahachiman nations, known as Long Beach, California. The sacred land is called Provongna, which means the gathering place or place of emergence. You'll see an educational link on land acknowledgements in the chat. And while they may be new to some folks, they are becoming more common here in the United States. It recognizes the painful history of genocide and forced removal of indigenous people. And the land acknowledgement is a way that we honor the people who came before us and our opportunity to live wherever we live. And the hope is that this is not a token gesture, but will lead to more tangible actions to repair harms of the past. You can learn about it there. I am honored to share this space with Alison and Mary Ellen, and we'll let them introduce themselves so we can dive in. Alison?
Thank you so much, Lorrie, and thank you all for being here today. It's so nice to see so many familiar names from last week in the chat. And thank you to Catalyst for hosting this series. My name is Alison Nakamura Netter, and I'm the Executive Director of Zana Africa. We're an organization based in Kenya that advances gender equity and supports girls on their journey through adolescence. A bit about me. I am half Japanese, half Irish woman in my mid-40s. And I have mid-length brown hair. I am calling in from my home office in Long Island, New York, which is the home of many, many Indigenous communities. The Indigenous name for this area is Sawanica, which translates in English to Island of the Shells, which is a really beautiful and fitting name for those of you who have been here or who may live here. I'm so thrilled to be hosting this discussion with Mary Ellen, my longtime partner and friend. And today we're going to be sharing a little bit about our partnership and how we are bringing trust-based philanthropy into action through our work. Mary Ellen?
Oh, great. Thanks, Alison. Hi, everybody. Welcome to anyone joining us for the first time, and welcome back to those of you from last week. And thank you, Catalyst, for so graciously hosting us. As Alison said, my name is Mary Ellen Cunningham. I'm a white woman in my mid-50s. I have short, dark brown hair with a lot of gray hair at my temples. I am calling from my home, and behind me is a shelf with a lot of found objects and books and candles. And my home is in Seattle, Washington, on the west coast of the United States. It is also the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples. They actually named this area after their chief, Chief Sealth. And as far as I know, it's the only major city in the United States that is named after a Native American chief. I'm a nonprofit consultant. I'm also a philanthropist, and I've had the privilege of partnering with Alison, not only, I think, maybe almost 9 years now, not only in support of the transformational mission of Zana Africa, but also in putting trust-based philanthropy practices into action. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really looking forward to engaging dialogue with all of you. Back to you, Lorrie.
Thank you both. So just a couple of little things to frame the conversation for your note-taking planning. The slide deck will be emailed to all participants after the session. In part one last week, we discussed the foundational elements and values of trust-based philanthropy and addressed some of the misconceptions. We heard from Mary, Ellen, and Alison about the roots of their trust-based partnership. And today we're diving into the 6 trust-based practices and what they look like in action through Alison and Mary Ellen's relationship. We will also spend time in breakout rooms to bring the topics of conversation a little closer to you all. So let's start with a little brief recap of last week with the definition of trust-based philanthropy and the foundations of the approach. Here you can read this. Trust-based philanthropy is a values-driven approach. It requires funders to embrace principles like equity, humility, and collaboration. And it's about shifting power so decisions are not dictated solely by wealth, but are guided by trust and mutual respect with the community served. This approach requires a deep commitment to transparency, active listening, and accountability, ensuring that the lived experiences of those impacted are prioritized in shaping the outcomes. Ultimately, trust-based philanthropy asks funders to value relationships and long-term change over control, focusing on shared goals rather than compliance. If you notice, this core set of values are written as verbs. They are a to-do list of sorts, and this creates intention about how funders choose to operate, create policies and processes, form cultural norms, and set up the structures that support this work. It's a journey of unlearning for many of us on both individual and organizational levels. So we all know that nonprofits are the drivers of social change. They champion ideas and solutions that reflect the aspirations and needs of their communities. However, conventional funding approaches in philanthropy have often hindered rather than supported their vital work. And for any recipients out there, you may laugh or you may have a little PTSD from this slide. The top-down power dynamics involved really keep the focus on the needs of the funders and are often experienced by nonprofits like this. And the data show that this actually is not uncommon at all. A roadblock analysis in 2017 by Open Road found that funder practices account for the greatest percentage of barriers to success for nonprofits. An example from which I love is from Voulet's wonderful blog, Nonprofit AF. If you have not seen it, please go on it. He talks about the firefighters, right? Imagine a group of firefighters and they're on their way to put out a fire that's raging. And as a funder of their work, you tell them, hey, listen, I want to make money, but I want to make sure I want to give you money, but I only want to make sure that that money's paying for the water. Don't want to pay for the hose or the ladder or the salaries of the firefighters. And then you pepper the firefighting organization with questions about how they allocate their funds and their overhead percentage. They're in a bit of a rush because there's a fire burning in their community, but you're adamant that you won't fund them unless they answer your questions to your satisfaction. And you think you're being a responsible funder. And so this is what it looks like when unrealistic and harmful expectations are approached with control and compliance. So when I first saw this Open Road visual, I was horrified, and then I was also not surprised either. And then the good news is that there's a movement to shift this. So as promised, this week we are focusing on the 6 practices of trust-based philanthropy. And in similar fashion to last week, Alison and Mary Ellen will take us into an overview of these 6 trust-based practices that we are centering the conversation on today. So we're going to move on to practice 1.
Great. Thank you so much, Lorrie. I love the overview and I love the firefighter example that you gave. It just kind of puts it all into a really simple picture for all of us. But okay, this is the first one. Practice 1, give multi-year unrestricted funding. I personally feel that this is one of the most important practices of trust-based philanthropy. It's really essential in helping nonprofits become more sustainable and forward-looking in their efforts. With multi-year commitments, grantees can pursue long-term goals without the interruptions and also the worry of applying for a yearly renewal. There's nothing more discouraging than starting an impactful project only to have it cut short when restricted funding runs out. And then with unrestricted flexible funding, it also gives grantees the kind of flexibility to be responsive and to adapt in times of crisis or if something new is popping up. So I think it's really, really essential that funders think about unrestricted funding if they have the capacity to do so. Mary Ellen?
Next slide. Okay. All right, do the homework. So from a funder's perspective, this is invaluable to showing up as a responsible partner. So typically, for those of you who are fundraisers in the room, the burden, you know this well, that the burden of instigating a potential funding relationship falls on the nonprofits, right? They're the ones expected to go out, find potential donors, educate those donors about who they are, what they do, make their case for themselves. And often even before an invitation to submit a proposal is even made, right? So as a funder, whether you be an individual donor, a foundation, government, whatever, there is work that we need to do before we are even looking to engage with a potential grantee, right? So get clear on our own funding goals. What do we not fund? At what levels? Be transparent about our funding eligibility criteria. And what is our decision-making process and timeline? Get to know the organizations that we're even possibly considering funding. We go to their events. We can find information. We can do research on them, read what's publicly available. Before you even start an initial conversation, and also, like, once a relationship is established, stay up to date. What's the organization doing? What's going on with the organization's work? So what this practice is basically saying is it's shifting the vetting onus to grant makers instead of on the nonprofits, making it the funder's responsibility to get to know prospective grantees. And what this does is it saves the nonprofit an incredible amount of time, and it allows for in-depth conversation and explorations in the very earliest stages of the vetting process. Alison.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Okay, this next one, simplifying and streamlining paperwork. This one is absolutely critical. I actually was just working on a grant report just before this call, and I can attest to the pain that sometimes goes into it. So simplifying and streamlining paperwork allows nonprofits to focus their time and energy on their mission rather than on paperwork and applying for grants and reporting. We often spend, as a nonprofit grantee, an inordinate amount of time doing this. And I think if funders can really think about letting go of kind of word count heavy applications and word count heavy grant reports, and kind of documenting and checking boxes, and really focusing on actually the impact, we would be a lot better off. So I want to say that simplifying paperwork doesn't mean, no accountability on part of the grantee. It just means about shifting the reporting to impact rather than sets of data. So I think funders should really consider how they can make the reporting process easier for grantees. You can sometimes do, verbal reports, video reports. It doesn't always have to be a certain set of criteria that has been given to a grantee because it's been done before. There are really creative ways to do this so that nonprofits can focus on mission rather than just reporting. Next slide.
Thank you, Alison. Be transparent and responsive. Another one that is critical. So open, honest, transparent communication supports the relationships that we're building that are rooted in trust and mutual accountability. So let's just spell it out, right? Nonprofit leaders are not mind readers, right? So if I'm a funder and I'm engaging in a funding relationship with an organization, with a nonprofit leader, they need to hear from me. I need to be, I've got a level of responsibility to be engaged. And so what that looks like in action, okay? So being transparent. And you're going to start to see a lot of overlap between these practices, which actually makes it a little easier to think about, implementing them because they're not disparate. They're all related. So again, being transparent right from the start. What do you fund? What do you not fund? What's my giving capacity? It's really critical to be able to be vulnerable and show and share what are challenges that might be going on at my foundation or my funding institution, and do the same. Encourage the grantee or the grantee partner you're in relationship with to share their organizational challenges. And once you're in partnership, notify your grantee partner if there's going to be some sort of a change that might pose a challenge or a change to the funding that they're expecting. And the last thing, that email, funders in the room, that email that's in your inbox, that's from your grantee partner that you've let sit there for how many weeks? Please answer it. We need to respond. They're reaching out, they need contact with you. So this one is fundamental to fueling that trust and that mutual accountability we've talked a lot about. Alison.
So offering support beyond the check, this one can be so transformational for a nonprofit organization and for the people who work there. Non-monetary support can come in the form of introductions to other funders. It can be through capacity building grants, like a professional development training, and it can be just as valuable to the organization as a financial contribution. For example, a scholarship to a conference, which can often feel elitist or exclusive, perhaps for some organizations that don't have these built-in networks and connections. Helping an organization get in the door and to have a seat at the table can be transformational and can really just put the organization in a whole new direction, and also to be seen and heard. So if you're a funder and you're not sure how to support your grantee beyond the check, just ask them. Ask them what they might need this year in terms of capacity building or support, or see where they want to grow, because it can be invaluable. Connections seem to be everything in this world of philanthropy. So the more you can connect, the better we'll all be.
Thanks, Alison. Reinforcing communication. So this one I can imagine gets often overlooked. Solicit and act on feedback. And I think this one is really critical. If you're doing it, it's a sign that you really are aware of the, kind of dismantling the power dynamics between that are so often in place between funder and grantee partner. And this is what this is rooted in, is this very simple concept of nothing about us without us. So this involves the funder, let's say myself, asking my grantee partners for direct feedback on my funding practices. So basically, in a nutshell, how am I showing up as a funder and a partner? Not at the global level, but asking specific questions. And what this does is it will actually help my practices too as a funder be more successful, more inclusive, more equitable, if I'm including and asking for the experience and expertise and perspective of the grantee partners and the communities I'm working with. And what this also does is it fosters trust, it improves policies and practices. And as I said, it's one of the best ways that funders can demonstrate and be held accountable to the nonprofits and the communities they serve. And Lorrie already mentioned what this requires are those key things we've been talking about through last week and already today: humility, curiosity, sharing power, and again, that focus on mutual accountability on the part of the funder. Thank you. Back to you, Lorrie.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks for that overview of the 6 practices. We are going to move gently into the breakout groups, but before we do that, we want to take 2 minutes to, not the poll yet, sorry. No poll yet. 2 minutes to emphasize the point about trust-based philanthropy being a values-driven approach and ground your breakout room conversations in a broader picture. So you want to find your starting point. When we create our values, we often immerse ourselves deeply in their creation, but those values end up sitting on internal documents on our website. And I think we have a slide for this, slide 15, folks.
Slide 15.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. So trust-based philanthropy encourages this alignment of values to practices, and that requires that we actually figure out what our values are. And if you do have articulated values, which most of us do, are they actionable? Are they in line? Are they operationalized? And so the values that the trust-based philanthropy actually encourages this alignment of values to practices, because values have little meaning unless they are operationalized. So When we look at operationalizing those values, the practices we just discussed are one of 4 dimensions through which values should permeate. In addition to the practices, aligning our values must also occur within our organizational culture, the structure, and the leadership. So culture is your organization's way of being. This includes things like assessing your current culture, normalizing conversations about power and race, supporting continuous learning, and creating space for reflection and dialogue. Structures. This is all your systems, your policies, your protocols, including decision-making structures. This dimension includes auditing systems, applying a trust-based lens to them, and decentralizing decision-making. That could look like participatory grant making, for example, and applying a relational lens to grant management. Leadership. Well, this kind of speaks for itself, being self-aware and transparent as a leader, listening, redefining what risk means, what is failure, and inviting that collaborative culture across your organization and for those you serve. And to shape that culture is included in this dimension. And then the practices, and this is what we just went over, those 6 practices, but this is essentially what you do and how you show up in relationship to your grantee partners. So at this point, we want to go into the breakouts, but value your input and want you to dig into what's most relevant to you. So in the spirit of democracy, we are going to vote. We can have that poll up now. I was going to say that went really quickly. I forgot I was automatically muted when we came in. But let's have some share outs. Would love to hear what the other groups talked about. There's also the notes, the link to the notes are in the chat, I believe. So you can look at that as well, but would love. So Alison, your group, is someone going to share out?
Yeah, we have a grant maker and a grant seeker who volunteered to share out. So either Godlove or Frederica, whoever wants to go first, take it away.
Ladies first.
Okay, I'll go. Hi everyone. So I'm the grant giver, the founder. So I work for a foundation here in Monaco. We support organizations around the world who support children and youth. And so what I shared is that to me, trust-based philanthropy does also serve the mission of founders, the initial and core mission of founders, which is to support the organization. Because if we apply all the practices of trust-based philanthropy, basically we followed the real needs of the organization. That was the first part. And I shared that to me, from my experience, the most challenging part is to really simplify the paperwork. And Jim shared that it was not really about paperwork, but rather about control management. And so to find new ways to achieve that. So very interesting. And also let Godlove or Sika to share what we learned from the grant seeker point of view.
Yeah, thank you so much, Federica. It looks like you had a record that you recorded everything that we talked about. So based on when we talk about a multi-grant provision to grantee, one of the things we said that is going to facilitate financial assistance to this organization. Is going to help them cover costs, operational costs for the organization. Is equally going to help them institute new initiative in terms of projects for that organization. That I'm just trying to rush over it. We equally talk about building capacity, that if organizations can have multi-funding, they'll have the opportunity to train themselves, to get some new skills to enhance what the organizations are working on. We equally talk about scaling capacity to scale. So whatever project they are working on, they have that capacity that they can scale to different communities. They can increase their scope of operation to different areas that are being affected or that they have to influence. And we lastly talk about, if I can remember very well, we talk about sustainability, that it helps the organization to be sustainable in terms of them, in terms of their operation and how they go about with their activities, running their activities in the organization. It's going to help them. The money we help them finance other projects is going to help them cover the cost, and it's going to help them increase their capacity. So if I can summarize, those are some of the points we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next group, Mary Ellen, your group. Would you like to have someone share out?
Sure. So we got right into our conversation, and I forgot to ask someone to officially play that role. So I'm going to just facilitate my group now around some of the key points. We ran out of time. We never even got to talk about paperwork. So anyone from my group, anything that was a key takeaway for you, or something you were inspired by that somebody shared? Unati gave a great example of why multi-year funding is so important. Perhaps, Unati, would you like to share your story of your successful program that had to be cut short, and as an example of the power of multi-year funding?
Yeah, sure. So I was sharing about the project that I was working with before joining Mountain Top, and we had this amazing project on gender-based violence, and we were running a helpline for online gender-based violence, and we had this huge funding, and everything was good. We had a huge team, and our project was really making impact. Like, we were reaching to 40,000 young girls and women who were facing online gender-based violence. But unfortunately, because of our funding duration, our funding was only for 18 months. And then we had to try and get another funding. And in that whole process, we had to change our project and make a lot of, like, cut short the team and everything. So yeah, that just affected the gist of and the essence of our project. So that was something which was a lived experience. And also, an insight that I got from our discussion was something that Laura shared about the collaboration amongst the funders. That is something that I'm going to think about more, because that was such a powerful and beautiful, just collaborating and working together, and the power of collaboration was something that I really loved and learned about. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Laura, do you really quickly want to just give a little background of what Unati just alluded to about your collaborative funders? It's inspiring.
Sure. So we have I have 3 funders, and I did not find the 3 funders by myself. I had one particular funder who's been walking alongside us for the last 9 years. And that particular funder wanted to de-risk slightly, and also wanted to introduce us to the network of funders, or other funders out there. And they actually brought to the table 2 more funders. They gave us a time to set up to meet those other 2 funders, to show who we were, to step into the light and say, this is who we are, and encourage us to create a friendship and a relationship with these other 2 funders. And then the 3 of them got together and collaborated how they were going to fund us with unrestricted funding for 4 years. And we're into year 2 going into year 3 of our unrestricted funding, and it's been absolutely amazing experience with these 3 funders. It's really been a superb experience.
Thank you, Laura. We're going to get back to your point, Alistair, but I've got to turn it over to the next group.
Sure. Thanks, y'all. And in my group, we actually, it went really quick too. Tara, would you like to share out? We can jump in. I too forgot to ask somebody, and so I voluntold Tara to go.
Voluntold, exactly. Hello, my name's Tara. I run a small family foundation based in Switzerland, whose support focuses on early years literacy in West Africa. But as I said, one thing is cause area, and we hope we achieve impact in that area, but much more importantly is not what we're doing, but how we're doing it. So I think that's what unites us here today. And we were in the group around paperwork. I'm already not doing it justice, just in its name, I think. But essentially, what was it called officially, our title? My first point was I was really surprised that so many people had voted for the unrestricted core funding as like the core issue, because I'm so surprised that as a group and that we haven't evolved past that it isn't a sort of a given and a basic. And I'm surprised that it got so much traction. So that was one sort of rant that did come up and that we sort of aired together. And then there was one other area around in terms of the paperwork and in terms of how to streamline processes around the grant application process. And we brainstormed different ideas, and Lorrie had a fantastic idea around using forms from other grant makers, so that they'd already submitted to other grant makers, so they wouldn't have to do their own application form just for that individual grant, or us as grant makers writing for them the application form where relevant. And my request to the team at that point was also, is there a generic grant form? And I know that there have been various suggestions, but how is it not possible that we don't have a grant form that at least covers 50% or 60 or 70% of the basic questions that everybody's asking, so that each time every implementing partner doesn't have to get to know a new, sexy system or application form, or when they're all the same questions every time. So I please wish there were that sort of central place that we could all start from and then personalize at the end. We then talked about simplifying the due diligence process and how different ways of doing that, and language came up as a big issue as well, just in terms of accessibility and how to ensure that we're not always asking communities and partners to be writing in English. I hope I've done us justice, team, as I said.
That's great. Does anyone from our group want to add to that? Okay.
I want to raise my hand.
Yeah,
Can I raise
Debbie,
my
go
hand?
ahead. Yeah, you can jump in, Debbie.
Tara, I love this about the forms are, so many of the questions are the same. Why can't we have one common app? Can I just tell you, college education in the US, my daughter's a senior, they have a common app. All the universities use it. Here's all the questions that we ask. The university can ask their own 1 or 2 questions. But literally, we got through a lot of those questions in a matter of a day versus weeks, each application taking a couple of hours. All I kept thinking was, why isn't funding like this? Why isn't funding like this?
Thanks for lifting that up. If that sector can do it, I don't see how, I feel like everybody's trying to like be their own unique thing when it's really like, actually, that's just that's placing burden on others. But this is great. This is exactly the kind of engagement and conversation we were hoping for. And Alison and Mary Ellen, I would love to hear from you both about like your reactions to some of these things in your rooms. Mary Ellen, you mentioned Alistair's comment and diving into that. But do one of you want to jump in with a reaction?
Alison, I've got one thought, just something that Godlove had said about capacity building when your group was talking about multi-year unrestricted funding. And so here we are, yes, still having this conversation, as Tara and Debbie and Lorrie have pointed out, like, really? But one of the things that I that comes to mind around that capacity building is like, we're already kind of talking about this, but if we already know, like, if an organization has sound internal operations, then, the back of the house kind of things, what that means for the actual program delivery and the impact, right? I think of it as a restaurant analogy. So you've come to a restaurant and you are expecting this delicious, nourishing meal, right? Well, in order to create that meal, if you're only funding what the host that greets you and the beautiful decor and the table setting, there's no meal that's going to be delivered to you, right? We've got to be thinking about a clean, high-functioning kitchen and a staff that's ordering the food, and the chef and health and hygiene, all of that sort of stuff. So I just really appreciate that point around capacity building that dovetails not only to the multi-year, but truly to unrestricted. Because when we think that the only dollars can go towards direct service or to the program on the ground, it's so short-sighted. And in some ways that does dovetail into, Alistair had made a point coming from the for-profit sector. I don't know, Alistair, if you want to share what you were bringing
Sure.
up as a kind of question comment that was interesting.
Yeah, I was curious to hear from both grant makers and funders on Beyond the Check, and what mechanisms or structures have you employed to sort of uncover potential opportunities there? Obviously, the funding is super critical and important, but I think one aspect that was raised in our breakout was, sometimes contacts and relationships and introductions and many other things could have potentially more value. So what are, just asking to the group, I guess, how does, in this sort of funder or grantee dynamic, how do you sit together and kind of uncover and brainstorm and figure out maybe what some opportunities might be for really impactful support beyond the check?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm wondering if that might be something interesting, like Alison, I know this is a really important one to you, if you've got examples of how that has worked for you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have 2 examples, and I think the examples really come down to building a relationship with your grantee, right? And really getting to know and asking them what it is that they feel that they need. And this goes back to trusting the grantee to be closest to the community, trust the person who works for the nonprofit to know what that nonprofit needs to stretch further and grow further than ever before. With Mary Ellen, for example, there was a point where we had this really impactful conversation back in 2017, and we've called it the stretch. For those of you who were on the last call, we talked a little bit about this, but during that conversation, it goes back to this kind of principle of soliciting and acting on feedback. She was asking us what she thought we might need, right? Like, I think you guys may need to invest in some work around your communications, right? Or maybe some work around your strategy. Do you feel that you might need that too? What do you need? I fund back of house capacity building support. What do you need? So the founder of Zana Africa and I went, put our heads together and came back to Mary Ellen and said, you know what, you're right. We do need these things. And we realized we needed a major donor program. So with Mary Ellen's support, we're able to hire a major donor consultant that helped us to build out a program that is now currently thriving and has gotten Zana Africa to, our growth has been exponential since that conversation with Mary Ellen. So I think it really comes down to creating the conditions for a grantee to feel safe that they can share with you what they need. I think as grantees, we want to seem so buttoned up and perfect and we know everything. And yeah, our major donor program's fine. Our communication strategy is great. We have a vision. We know what we're doing. And we do, but we need more support to get there. So if you can make the grantee feel safe in your presence and safe to say what they need, it can go such a long way. And even really simple things like, hey, I thought it might be helpful to introduce you to these 5 funders that I know. I'm happy to write an email for you, or do you want to write the email for me? And really getting down to that human level of how can I help and what can I do to support you, and creating that safe space for that. I hope I've answered that question. And I can give critical, concrete examples if it's helpful, but I think it's really about the relationship piece.
Well, and Alison, what I was going to say to that is that stretch conversation is a great example of, there were just that power differential. There was nothing, but no differential between us in that conversation. We were partners with a shared goal, which was Zana's well-being, Zana's impact, Zana's sustainability. And so what it allowed us to do was to brainstorm together, what's needed here, what's the issue, and what's needed here. So we could so to your point, Alistair, it's that's where there can be some of that creative brainstorming, hey, I know somebody who, or even if I'm not the one that can actually provide the graphic design that would have helped their communications or whatever, but hey, I know someone else that's doing this, or what about this idea? So there's also some element to that level of engagement and partnership where you're just in it together, where you might then be able to solutionize. And I think that, I just totally lost what I was going to say.
No, I wanted to pick up on that because I think all of this speaks to the power dynamic. I think all of the 5 practices or 6 practices of trust-based philanthropy, you can more easily implement them when the power dynamic has been equalize, or the funder is trying to equalize the power dynamic, because it's deeply rooted, right? It's not something you just say like, I'm changing the power dynamic and it happens. You have to really work on it. And now I'm losing what I was going to say, but I think, yeah, one of the points is just creating those conditions. Even, oh, I had another point. Sorry, I've had funders say like, oh, I met someone at X, Y, and Z conference. Like, can I introduce you to them? And say it's a new relationship with a new funder. I am always inclined to say like, yes, but sometimes it's not a good use of my time to meet with this contact if they're not really going to help the organization. So I think the funder has to say like, if this is not helpful to you, please do not feel like you have to say yes to me and speak to this person that I met at a cocktail party. You know, and really, and it sounds so kind of elementary and like you're kind of hand-holding the grantee, but I think really just letting the person know, like, you do not have to satisfy every need that I have because I am your funder, right? Because I think as grantees, we sometimes feel that way, like we're a little bit smaller, but we got to come to the table with a more egalitarian mindset and know that you're like equal partners in it. So it comes from both sides.
Thank you.
And I want to, and I say one more thing, Lorrie, I know we're so
Sure,
short. I want to say something from the funder standpoint, especially in regards to that conversation that Alison and I had, the stretch conversation, that there's uncertainty on the funder side too. At least I'll speak for myself in that I had to be vulnerable in bringing to Alison and Megan my questions or thinking about, you know, okay, you've come with this proposal and what are the expectations of me? It's just a funder, should I just say yes? Do I lean in just to the money? Like, it took some vulnerability and trust to say, hey, listen, this is something I'm thinking about. I'm worried that Zana's in a vulnerable place. Let's talk about this. And to not right away, this is an organization I've already been in partnership with, an organization I care deeply about, but not just automatically say yes. That you can lean in a lot of different ways. So to, you know, Alistair bringing up, like leaning into, well, maybe right now I don't have the funds, but here's something else I can offer, and not feel like I'm not living up to my end of the deal as well, but also to be a strategic partner to say, okay, I'm in. And I think Alison knew that I'm in, but let's strategize together about what in is the best way to be in for Zana. And so just to know that, I think that funders too, they think they're supposed to know. They think because it's been set up for them too, they've internalized all this bad stuff around philanthropy too, and that they think they're supposed to know it and they're supposed to do it in a certain way. So there's a lot of undoing for the funders too. And I think there's some vulnerability and questioning on their end too, even though they don't often come across that way, and kind of the opposite.
Thank you. Thank you for lifting that up. I also just want to bring a really quick answer. Anna Marie, your question in the chat, how can a funder create such an in-depth relationship given the fact that so many organizations want and need the funds? If you haven't seen the last week's session, definitely gets into how to create those relationships, the foundations of those. But I would also say that this is on one hand, if you streamline and simplify paperwork, if you are de-burdening, you will actually save time. I don't know how many funders are chasing grantee partners for reports that are overdue, and all that time wasted, you can actually put that time and reallocate it into the relationship. And that's the piece that I think people don't really understand, is that you can save time and energy in one area, right, of things that are based in compliance and control, because that's the way it's always been done through these, you know, banking systems of philanthropy, right? And we can reallocate that time to fostering the kind of relationship that is around learning and how can I be of service and how can I better serve the greater ecosystem. We as funders can be part of the ecosystem that is around, you know, when we basically want to invest in nonprofits to succeed. We want you to win, and that should be the focus on it. So I want to do a quick, can Mary Ellen and Alison, you want to do kind of quick takeaways, and then we'll close out and let Catalyst do their thing?
Yes. Okay. I will be short. So one thing I want to give right here is what I think it ultimately underlines all of this is the word dignity. And I want to give you all a definition of dignity, which is the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. I just want to sit with that for a second. the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. I think what we've been talking about is that many funder-grantee relationships are not grounded in recognizing, respecting, and preserving one's dignity and humanity through this process. And we as donors, I think, and grantees, we do things and we believe things and we accept things in funding relationships that we would never do, believe, or accept in other relationships in our lives. For example, like, not being transparent or honest with somebody, or being a terrible communicator, or maybe even ignoring somebody. For me to not ask for or listen to or respect someone else's opinion or ideas, experience, perspective. Just accepting that it's okay to be discounted, disregarded, and disrespected, right? Coming in and driving my own agenda. So these are examples of things that happen in these funder-grantee relationships that would not fly in other relationships in our lives. And so it really comes back to the values and principles we talked about last week and have come up today, recognizing and dismantling the power imbalance between donors and grantees. And we do that through showing up with humility, curiosity, empathy, vulnerability, and transparency. And it's approaching this work as partners versus benefactor and recipient, really acknowledging that we each provide expertise and contributions towards our shared goals, and ultimately centering those of you closest to the work, valuing experience and expertise over money and position. And as Lorrie said, these actions, they build trusting relationships, but that trust requires cultivation. It doesn't just happen. And it doesn't just persist. So it's got to be earned, it's got to be built, it's got to be cultivated, and sometimes it needs to be repaired. But it's not unconditional, and it requires mutual accountability. Alison?
Beautiful. That was beautifully said. And I completely agree with everything that you've just shared. And I think what you're talking about here and what we've been talking about over these past 2 sessions is that trust-based philanthropy is really relational, right? And it's very human-centered. So I think if we can all kind of leave these conversations thinking about how to be more human in our approach to philanthropy and be more respectful and honoring kind of that sense of dignity for one another, I think that we can speed up the pace of progress for our world a lot faster. My 3 takeaways as a grantee, I know we're really short on time right now, but the first thing I want to impart is that I think grantees need to do kind of as like a fundraiser, do the internal work that you need to do to have these conversations with funders. You need to remember that you belong in this conversation, and you really need to come to these conversations with a sense of agency and an egalitarian mindset. This is a true partnership. The donor or their funder is not more important than you. They are a partner in this work of impact, and you are there together to advance the goals and the mission of the nonprofit that is in service and the people that you're being in service to. So again, just it's a true partnership, and the donor needs you just as much as you need them. I also think it's really critical, not just for the fundraiser to do the work, but the organization that you work for needs to do that internal work. So if you expect your donors to trust you and your organization, you need to make sure that all members of your team and the culture of your organization are kind of doing this hard internal work. So are your team members accountable to one another? Do they value collaboration, communication, and transparency? Can we show up as an organization as a trusted partner to this donor? Because as Mary Ellen said, like, this is not just given, it is earned. It is a relationship that, any friendship that you have in your families, like, you need to work at this and ensure you're doing the internal work to show up in true collaborative partnership. And then lastly, I would say it's a marathon, not a sprint. So trust-based philanthropy is not an all or nothing approach. A funder can begin by adopting a single practice and build from there. So with each step, we can strengthen the foundation for meaningful impacts and partnerships. And I really just hope that, I'm seeing more foundations and institutional partners practice trust-based philanthropy, but I would love to see individual donors do this too. So, for Frederica, for the donors that are funding your organization, and then you're going out to fund more partners, how do we kind of get an everyday donor who's considering philanthropy or giving $1 to a local food bank or whatever that is? How do they trust? How do they, employ this in the way that they're thinking? So that would be it. And I really think that we can, if we kind of do this and practice trust-based philanthropy as partners in this world, that we can create a more impactful world and a better place for all of us to live and raise our children. So.
It is. It's the right thing to do. It's also smarter because it becomes, it creates a stronger nonprofit network that is more effective. And so that they do succeed at their missions, and we kind of take a chunk out of these complex problems. We are way short on time. We're a little over. I want to say a huge thank you to Catalyst and Alison and Mary Ellen. We have some trust-based philanthropy resources for you. Don't worry. Again, this is going to be sent to you afterwards. It is tiny writing. They are all clickable links. And if you know of any other convenings, organizations, or groups that would be interested in the conversation and having, chats with Mary Ellen and Alison, please reach out. I'm going to pass it over to Meru with Catalyst right now.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Mary Ellen, and thank you, Lorrie, for the absolutely wonderful session and for the enriching conversations around trust-based philanthropy. And thank you all the participants for attending. It was absolutely wonderful having all of you with us. Next, I would like you to have share your feedback with us. So if you could take a minute to do that, that would be wonderful. Okay, thank you for responding. We will keep it open for just a few more seconds. Okay, thank you for providing your feedback. We would love it if you could register for the upcoming fundraising masterclass with For Impact, and it's on basic and strategies, and we will also be launching our fundraising toolkit. And during that fundraising masterclass, you will find the link in the chat. We also have our upcoming fundraising masterclasses in collaboration with Black Fox Global, and you can also register for those with the links in our chat. And here is our social media. We thank you again for the wonderful session. Thank you to all the lovely speakers and to all the participants.